Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about creating hypotheses. This is something that I hear from classes over and over again has been the hardest part of PBL so far. So I want to make sure that we address this and hopefully help you to understand hypotheses a little bit better. So the first thing about a hypothesis is understanding what a hypothesis is. A hypothesis is really an educated guess that we use to connect information. So we connect something we know with something we don't know, or something we already knew with something that we learn about our clients. So it's kind of like this photo of the arrow here. You can see there's a black side to the arrow and there's a white side to the arrow. The black side maybe is information that we get from the case scenario. And the white side could be information that we already know from another class or from an experience we've had in our life. And so when we put those two things together, we get a direction that we can go when we're looking at our case scenario or at a client's file. Now, the next thing we need to understand is why do we need to create hypotheses? And we create hypotheses for a few different reasons. First of all, it helps us to organize the information that we have, right? We can make those connections that are going to help us to think more deeply about our clients. And it's also helping us to be as prepared as we can be, that we're not walking into a situation with a client without having thought of what might be happening. Also, what goes along with that is that a hypothesis helps to direct our research so that we can prepare. So, for example, if we look at this photo, you can see there's a yellow cable, there's an orange cable, and there's a blue carabiner between them. So maybe the yellow cable is information about our client. The orange cable is that information that we already know from another course or from our life. And this teal colored carabiner, that is our hypothesis. It's trying to connect those pieces of information so that we have more to work with, a better understanding and idea of what we might be walking into when we see this client. So now we need to think about how do we create a hypothesis? We know what it is and why we're using it, but how do we create it? And when you're creating a hypothesis, I would encourage you to think of three key questions. The first question is, what do I already know? What have I already learned or already understood from things that have happened in my life? The second question is, what do I not know? What is unfamiliar? Are there words in the case scenario that I don't understand? Or maybe there's just something in the case scenario that doesn't make sense when I try to put it together. And the third question is, what's missing? This is a case scenario, it's not a real person. So, what is missing from this scenario that I might need to try to hypothesize an answer to? So, for example, if a case scenario gave you a client's symptoms, but not their actual diagnosis, that's a piece of information that's missing that we could hypothesize about. So, how do I write a hypothesis? Well, a hypothesis is like a formula, like something you might have done in math or science class that maybe looks a bit like this. But our formula for hypotheses looks a little bit different. I would encourage you to use a formula that says if then, or since then, or I wonder because. So, what you're going to do is you're going to say what you think might be happening and why you think it might be happening. I wonder if this is going on because the case scenario told me that this other thing is happening. Since the client is having these symptoms, then I think that it might be this diagnosis. So we can use these kinds of formulas to help us write a hypothesis to think about what might be happening with our clients. The last thing to consider is that your hypothesis is going to help you come up with a direction for your research. It's going to help you choose a learning issue, and your learning issue is really just a research question. So, your hypothesis should help you come up with your learning issue. So, as an example, let's think about back a couple years ago, I injured my wrist. And when I injured my wrist, I didn't stop using my wrist. I kept cooking, I kept working on my computer. I didn't give myself a break. So I might have a hypothesis that says, since Prof. Rachel didn't rest her wrist, then maybe her injury is getting worse, right? Maybe that's something that I learned in a previous course or I saw another friend experience. So my hypothesis is that because Prof. Rachel did not take a break, her injury is probably getting worse. So now that I have that hypothesis, I need to research whether that hypothesis is probably true or not. So my learning issue, my research question could be, does continuing to use your wrist after injuring it affect the healing time or the progress of healing, right? I've taken a hypothesis that I've made and I've come up with a question that's going to help me test if I'm right or wrong. And the great thing about PBL is that it is okay to be wrong. I have come up with many hypotheses before that have turned out to be incorrect, and that's okay. That's why we do research. That's why we go through this whole plan and this whole process so that at the end of the day, we can see if we're right or wrong about what we're thinking, and then we can adjust and make sure that we're providing the best treatment for our client.